Hello. Today we are having third class. It is devoted to topic Soviet republics, and we'll discuss simulated stateness, political traditions, and conflicting policies in Soviet republics. First of all, I'd like to discuss with you major areas within the domain of Russian Empire and Soviet Union. We already talked about those main areas, and I'd like to remind you that we single out Northern Eurasia, where Russia is situated, and Russian Federal Soviet Socialist Republic of Soviet Union was situated. Then we also single out Balto-Euxenic system with Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine and Moldova composing this major area within Soviet Union. Then Transcaucasian system with the three Soviet republics, Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia. Central Asian system with five republics, Soviet republics, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, with Kazakhstan, which actually is a special case, as we already talked, being interface of Northern Eurasia and Central Asia. Well, within those significantly different areas, similar policies have been developed, which led to synchronization of political processes there. Of course, it's quite important to know that imperial center-periphery institutional structure has been established throughout the whole country, and naturally also it significantly developed in specific republics. Each republic was also based on a center-periphery institutional structure and was framed into a general center-periphery structure of Soviet Union. Still, within this system, the complete homogeneity, the complete hierarchical structure could not be easily developed with all the efforts of Soviet leadership to synchronize policies in those areas. The very natural solution was to create pockets of exclusion or peripheral immunities. We can also call it this way. By doing so, Soviet leadership avoided unnecessary tensions between regions and the center. But of course, those tensions still were there. They've been reduced to an extent by creation of pockets of exclusion, but still they were there. Another very important, that was the structural characteristic of the system. But speaking in terms of structure, agency, paradigm, we also have to acknowledge that there were specific agency related to Soviet development, and this agency actually was very much linked to the previous tradition of split into westernized educated orders or classes and autochthonous orders. Now, both those agencies had alternative strategies of development. In Soviet situation, the modernized order was the one linked to the dominating ideology, while regional autochthonous orders were clearly related to national or even local traditions. Transition from Russian Empire to Soviet Union was not easy, and it implied a great variety of historical experience on institution building being, as I mentioned already, synchronized. In all 5 major areas, those efforts led to achievements of fairly advanced state building, to maintaining of very primitive practices. In actual fact, in some very distant areas, they were tribal practices. Soviet Union actually reproduced imperial geopolitical structure, but what has been done, a fairly great degree of rationalization of this structure. To do that, Soviet leadership had to develop specific patterns of state building. Of course, there were fairly elaborate patterns of state building, and they were varying to a great extent throughout the country. But we can single out 2 major aspects of state building. Those 2 aspects are in a sense conflicting, but on the sense they are complementary. On the one hand, one aspect implied creation of common Soviet identity and political infrastructure. Well, political infrastructure could be decreed, but it was important to make it workable. And to make it workable, one had to develop a common Soviet identity. It took decades for Soviet leadership to make significant progress in this regard, and I must say that by 60s, the first fruits of those efforts became quite evident. Of course, significant achievements have been also reached at an earlier stages. For example, during the period of the 30s, when the Constitution of 1937 have been created, which was a significant step in elaborating rationalized and integral constitutional framework for political infrastructure. But another aspect of state building was an aspect of creation of socialist nations and their states. When I'm saying that this was both conflicting and complementary, I imply the following, that the common Soviet identity was at odds with specific national identities, while creation of socialist nations, particularly in various union republics, and creating of state structure in union republics, autonomous republics, and in some other entities, was in a sense contradicting this idea of common Soviet identity and integral infrastructure of the Union. But on the one hand, it was definitely complementary. As I mentioned, it was impossible to develop completely heterogeneous political system of rule in the country, so you have to reach a compromise between those 2 aspects. A very important achievement of the efforts of Soviet leadership were linked with the constitutional makeup of the country. There were several constitutions in the country. We wouldn't go in detail outlining the character of each of those constitutions and their constitutional design. A fairly important landmark had been the so-called Stalin Constitution, the Constitution of 1937. It is important in the sense that it fixed 4 distinct types of segment status on 4 different levels of organization. I'm using the term segment status following example of Roeder, who actually wrote a fairly well elaborated book trying to prove that segment status is a distinct characteristic of federal and imperial systems. By segment states, he implies states that do not have sovereign status, but on the other hand possess certain characteristics of states and have institutions that are directly linked to statehood facilities and abilities. So coming back to Soviet Constitution of 1937, as I mentioned, we have 4 levels of organization there. At the first or top level, we have national union republics. These are republics that actually constitute Soviet Union, that are signatories of Union Treaty, and it's up to them actually to be the formal vehicles of Soviet stateness. And those union republics definitely developed or imitated very often institutions of state. They had their own government, they had their own constitutional setup, constitutions. They also had their representative organs, legislation, and so on and so forth. The second level was national or autonomous republics and national, that is, Russian areas, krai, and regions, oblasts, within units of the first level. On the third level, we have national or autonomous regions, автономные области, within units of the second level. And on the fourth level, at the very bottom of this hierarchical structure, we have national autonomous localities, национальные округа, within units of second level. It's a very specific feature of Stalin Constitution of 1939, as well as of all the informal and formal structure of the Soviet Union, was a very specific place of Russian Federation within this system. Although Russian Federation was the biggest Union Republic, it was considered, in a sense, as having a very special status, status of discrimination. While in other republics, for example, there existed elaborate systems of statehood, and there also existed there, for example, national communist parties, at least formally, party organizations, Republican Party organizations, were considered autonomous, fairly autonomous within the CPSU structure. They had their own central committees and other structures. Russian Federation had nothing of the kind. There existed no Communist Party of Russian Federation, and it was only late in Perestroika period that attempts to create one have been established. That means that in many aspects, Russian Federation was directly governed and run by the Union authorities, be it on the level of Communist Party or be it on the level of administration of the Council of Ministers or on any other level. Strategy of Soviet homogenization, which I already mentioned, was carried out differently in accordance with local conditions and, what is more important, traditions. This has been reflected not only on the level of structure and agency, but this has also been reflected on the level of policies. And on the level of policies, we also can observe the same complementarity and conflict of the two major types of policies. We can see two complementary approaches to development of political institutions and political cultures through the consistent pursuit of specific kinds of policies. One type of policies was the so-called nationalizing policies. By using this term, I refer to notion developed by Brubaker and very much discussed in recent period, particularly as far as post-Soviet and post-communist countries are concerned. But this notion definitely has relevance, as has been indicated by many participants of the debate, also to other areas of the world. So this idea of nationalizing policies, that is, policies of imposing a specific national identity, specific national priorities, agendas, and so on and so forth, is typical of many countries of the world, as I mentioned, but we can clearly see that these nationalizing policies were carried out in Soviet Union. Soviet Union, the Soviet leadership deemed it absolutely necessary to develop and simulate national statehood of Union republics, but to do so it was necessary to develop nationalizing policies in those republics. Those policies were related to encouragement of development of the so-called national intelligentsia there, of simulating statehood structures in the republics, of developing a system of education, national languages, national academies of sciences, and so on and so forth. But there was a complementary aspect to those policies. Of course, Soviet Union wouldn't stand if only nationalizing policies were carried out in individual republics. It would simply fall apart into those republics. So to keep Soviet Union together, it was necessary to develop internationalizing policies, counterbalancing nationalizing policies, and probably even being sometimes a priority for Soviet leadership. Of course, these internationalizing policies were very clearly linked to old imperial traditions of the country, and we can, by all means, consider calling them not only internationalizing policies but also imperializing policies. It would be equally true to give such a name to this type of policies. Of course, the ideal setup which I described to you was only a kind of general pattern, general logical pattern that has been used by Soviet leadership. In practical terms, of course, there were disbalances between nationalizing and internationalizing policies and between other complementary aspects of the system. Restoring the balances led to development of Soviet Union, and actually for a period of a few decades it was possible to maintain balance between conflicting and complementary aspects of institutional design, of traditions, of different policies that have been carried out in the country, and actually to achieve a degree of development both within the Union and in different parts of the Union, all the 5 major areas and individual republics, as well as political entities, polities that existed on all the 4 levels of the organization of Soviet Union. But already in early 60s there appear signs of approaching crisis. And those signs, in my understanding, could be attributed to the very progress achieved by Soviet Union. As I mentioned, by the 60s, Soviet Union was developing fairly quickly and has achieved significant progress in terms of creating profound infrastructure, generating significant resources, and what is particularly important, developing an imperial sphere of influence not only within its own area but outside it, with the socialist countries that were surrounding Soviet Union, with communist parties that existed in many countries of the world, front organizations, and so on and so forth. The international influence of Soviet Union was increasing. It was an imperial influence, and the way how it was organized very much resembled the structural and agency aspects which I already mentioned earlier. All that led to a situation when Soviet Union became a fairly big and complicated system. And this expanse of the system, its complicated organization, its conflicting elements that were used in the construction, conflicting policies upon which it was based, led to a situation when systemic degradation became necessary. System became too big and too complicated to be effective, to effectively meet the challenges both inside and outside the country. Of course, the existence of pockets of exclusion, of course, existence of this intricate balance of complementary politics, policies, help to compensate for the emerging problems related to systemic crisis. But the solution, the spontaneous solution that very often Soviet Union had to resort to was, as I mentioned, systemic degradation. That is, attempt to reduce the pressure of challenges by stepping back, by reducing the level of commitment to various international or national developments, and also this systemic degradation could be developed could be achieved by creation or using of pockets of relative systemic resistance. You remember pockets of exclusion, so where they could be used also to organize and to maintain systemic resistance, to stabilize the system, and even to achieve partial consolidation. So when I say that since 60s we can observe the trend towards systemic degradation, one have to realize that this degradation was very slow. It was practically invisible. It was going, so to say, deep inside the system. But the cumulative effect of this degradation gradually led to a profound crisis that actually emerged about 2 decades later. Of course, this tendency to systemic degradation was also very much related to patterns of imitated state building in Soviet republics. Those patterns, as I mentioned already, were significantly different. And those differences became more and more visible due to what I described as deepening of systemic crisis. Just to give you a few examples, I can mention the fact that, for example, in Transcaucasian republics or in Baltic republics, fairly significant steps have been taken to increase, to strengthen specific traditions of these countries. At that somewhat later stage, the same process actually overcome the Central Asian republics. While, for example, in Ukraine and Belarus, this tendency was more or less checked. So the developments were uneven, and differences between republics were more and more visible. You can compare, for example, two cases, Lithuania and Belarus. Two very similar ecologically, culturally, and socially systems. At some stage, if you remember, during the Civil War, for example, actually there has been created a common Lithuanian-Belarusian republic. You also probably recollect that for a few centuries there existed a great duchy of Lithuania, where both nations existed together. So with all the similarities between Belarus and Lithuania, and with all the potential for fairly close and similar development that existed there. By the end of the Soviet period, you could see very different results achieved in both countries. The balance of policies, of nationalizing policies and internationalizing policies in two cases led to dramatically different results. While in Lithuania, with all the importance of, so to say, general projects of all union nature, economical projects like building of atomic power station in Ignalina, or developing other important projects there. Lithuania definitely became one of the most visible examples of achievements in the field of nationalizing policies. The national culture, national identity, and even specific national traditions in running not only some administrative business, but also in running of the party business. The party organization of Lithuania achieved a fairly distinct national face by that time, while in the neighboring Belarus, the most profound effect could be attributed to internationalizing policies. With all the lip service to Belarus and with all the importance of Belarusian statehood, actually this Belarus for several decades has been a member, actually from the very foundation of the United Nations, had been member of the United Nations and actually participated there. So this was additional incentive for development of nationalizing policies in Belarus. Still, the impact of internationalizing policies was far more greater there, and Belarus became a kind of reserve of Soviet way of life, Soviet identity, and Soviet patterns of behavior, as opposed to national ones. Those differences between individual republics that became more and more visible became particularly relevant during the period of perestroika. The period of perestroika was a period when systemic crisis, which I mentioned, came into the open. And systemic degradation during this period led to further divergence and desynchronization of political processes within individual territories, having status of segment states, within union republics, first of all, but also on all four levels of political organization and in different areas of the country. And actually, this process even touched upon some territories which had no distinct national identity and formally were not belonging to this club of segment states of Soviet Union. But I'll come to that somewhat later. The processes which I described were taking place in all the regional territories, be it union republics or some other national segment states. And in everywhere during the period of perestroika, projects of state building have been launched. Perestroika actually led to emergence of new independent states on the basis, and all the new independent states were created on the basis of union republics, and territories with incomplete sovereign status, which could be attributed to projects of state building in the territories having other status, practically in autonomous republics or in former autonomous republics, or in two cases at least in the specific areas which had no segment stateness at the moment of perestroika, but which had distinct national character and had some historical base for creation, state building projects. The watershed, the important watershed, was of course December of 1991, when Soviet Union was dissolved. But coming back, I must say that there were other fairly important, crucial moments, and one of those moments was a period of the Parade of Sovereignties in 1990, which also was fairly important. Probably it was in 1990 that all the major state building projects for the period to come have been formulated or have actually become visible. Suffice to mention that already as far back as 88, the first attempts to develop specific statehood of Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous region have been taken place, but this was rather an exception. That was a very early bird in this development. But if we mention, for example, Transnistrian case, we can see that already in September of 1990 there has been declared independence of this region. Of course, Transnistrian region had no place within the structure of Soviet imitated segment stateness at the moment of perestroika, but you have to take into consideration that for quite a long period of time during the 20s and 30s, for about 2 decades, for nearly 2 decades, there existed exactly within the boundaries where so-called Transnistrian Moldavian Republic has been created. There also existed autonomous Moldavian Republic within Ukrainian Union Republic. And the memory of existence of this structure was so profound that despite the interval of more than 4 decades, exactly in the same territory, attempt was undertaken to create a separate stateness. So after December 31, we have a number of distinct cases of the projects of state building in post-Soviet space, and all these cases could be enumerated and clearly put down. We'll consider 23 distinct cases, besides 15 union republics, which and the projects of state building in union republics led to emergence of new independent states, as I mentioned. There were 8 other cases. 4 of such cases in the period that ensued from the moment of dissolution of Soviet Union and present day proved to be abortive cases. Actually, there were attempts to create statehood, but they failed. But still, there are 4 cases where the projects of state building are still alive. So what are all the cases, all the 23 cases? If we take Northern Eurasia, we'll see one new independent state there, which is Russian Federation, but also within the same area we have also a case of a project of state building. That is the case of Chechnya, and this is an abortive case. For a period of time, alternative state building structures have been created there, but at the moment what we can see is the Republic, is Chechen Republic, which is a clear case of segment state within Russian Federation. Alternative statehood projects have failed. If we turn to Balto-Yuksinic system, we'll see there 9 cases. First come, of course, the 6 new independent states. They are Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, and Ukraine. But there are also 3 projects of state building that played an important role there. 2 cases are at the moment abortive. The case of Gagauzia, which is now integrated in Moldova and has a status of segment state or segment structure, autonomous structure within this republic, and Transnistria, which still is trying to develop its statehood, but is not recognized internationally. The 9th case is the case of Crimea. For a period of time, Crimean project of statehood seemed to be quite lively, but this is also an abortive case, because now the autonomous Crimean Republic is part of the structure of Ukraine, and there's no chance of overcoming the level of segment stateness within Ukraine, and even that status is being now reduced in practical terms. There's no difference between status of Ukraine and any other region within status of Crimea or any other region within Ukraine. Now coming to Transcaucasian system, here we have a very complicated developments within the domain of statehood projects. Besides the 3 Union Republic projects that led to creation of independent Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, we also have a very complicated case of Karabakh, and also have projects of nation building in Abkhazia, Adjaria, and South Ossetia. The project of Adjarian state building is an abortive one, but Abkhazian and South Ossetian cases are still quite prominent. And recently there were made attempts to carry out referenda there, to develop new constitutional designs, and so on and so forth, to raise the level of statehood of those countries, level of legitimation of those countries, if not international, then at least national. If when in Central Asia, and we have only new independent states, although potentially there were areas and locations where nation-building processes could develop. Particularly, it was Nagorny Badakhshan, that's part, mountaineerous part of Tajikistan. There was Fergana Valley. There was significant split within Kyrgyzstan between southern and northern areas of the country. Of course, there's a distinct difference between the northern part of Uzbekistan, close to Aral Sea, Karakalpak Republic, and the rest of the country. There's a significant difference between the localities around Samarkand and Bukhara. But with all those differences and potential areas where state-building projects could emerge, in none of those cases actually any attempt of this kind developed. Probably this could be attributed to a fairly difficult situation for state building generally in that area. State building in that area is handicapped by existence of local, tribal, and regional traditions that imply personalistic, face-to-face actions rather than creation of impersonal statehood structures. And this could be one of the explanations why state-building processes in Central Asia and Kazakhstan have not been that visible as, for example, in Transcaucasia or Balto-Euxinic system. So again, I'd like to mention that we have 23 cases, 15 plus 8. 8 are covering developments in former autonomous republic or even localities. Particularly, this is related to Transnistria and Gagauzia. 4 are already abortive cases of state building: Crimea, Chechnya, Gagauzia, and Adjaria. And 4 other, namely Transnistria, Karabakh, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia, are still continuing projects of state building. Great variety of historical experience of institution building in all 5 major areas led to cases of fairly advanced state building, which is the case of, for example, new independent states in Baltic area, or say Russian or Moldovan case, or the case of Armenia, and far more complicated cases where the state building processes were undermined by tribal practices, as is the case, for example, or was the case of Chechnya. Actually, the Chechen state building project failed because of the predominance of tribal and very archaic practices, which undermined from within this case. Of course, the military, political, legal, economic interference of Russia and efforts aimed at restoring law and order in the area played quite an important role. But I would say that internal reasons, the predominance of tribal practices, were a major stumbling block for creation of Chechen statehood. And actually, this was the reason why Chechenian state institutions couldn't function as effectively as it was necessary for developing a proper state-building processes. The only thing that Chechenian state builders could provide was guerrilla resistance, but this guerrilla resistance was actually very close to true tribal practices. In all other aspects, they simply failed. They couldn't create neither rule of law system, no integral system of law enforcement. All this very important and essential aspects couldn't be run by leaders of self-proclaimed Ichkeria Republic, and this was, I would say, one of the major reasons why their efforts were counterproductive and their case became abortive. If we have now make a general overview of developments of state building within the area, we would probably come to conclusion that results of state building within the territory of former Soviet Union were determined by two major aspects. One aspect was the policies that have been carried out by Soviet leadership, and I have described them earlier. The policies that were linked to nationalizing policies and internationalizing policies, simulation of stateness, that is, efforts to synchronize state building processes within Soviet Union. Of course, there were spontaneous processes of desynchronization, but still the conscious efforts of Soviet leadership were efforts for synchronization of these processes. But we wouldn't be able to understand results of state building and the main trajectories of state building if we wouldn't take into consideration also traditions that existed within those areas. And with all the importance of efforts undertaken by Soviet leadership, all generations of Soviet leadership, you wouldn't be able to ignore importance of traditions that started long ago, much earlier than the very emergence of Soviet Union. And these were not only imperial traditions of Russian Empire, although those traditions are, of course, quite important, and where we could acknowledge that in some cases those traditions were quite visible. But this is related to much earlier traditions. particularly if we discuss situations in Transcaucasia or in Central Asia, or even in the area of Balto-Euxinic system. Just to mention a few examples, I'd like to draw your attention to Crimean case and Transnistrian case. Here we have a fairly and these are two conflicting cases having different logic. While in Transnistrian case we have a very good expression of the importance of simulated stateness of the Soviet period. As I mentioned before, the autonomous Moldovan Republic existed for about 2 decades, then disappeared, and then in its place new Transnistrian Moldovan Republic has been established. As I mentioned, fairly early during the period of perestroika, before actually collapse of Soviet Union, a year before collapse of Soviet Union, in September 1990. At the same time, if we take the case of Crimea, it would look as if this case is very similar, because there also existed autonomous Crimean Republic within Russian Federation, which existed for quite a number of decades and which was annulled at the end of the Second World War, and later this purely administrative structure, the non-national, so to say, region, was transferred into Ukraine from Russian Federation in '94 and remained there as unnational region. The difference between these two cases is a fairly profound historical memory of political history of Crimea, where not only Crimean Khanate existed for several centuries, from the 14th till the 18th century, but also to a very special place of this region, both within Balto-Euxinic system and then Russian Empire. It's quite evident from this point of view that despite the fact that Crimean case was an abortive case of state building, the potential for maintaining a very special status of Crimea and necessity to have some degree of state building, specific Crimean state building there in the region is very obvious. If we look from this point of view to situations in Central Asian republics, we'll have to recognize that the present situation of consolidating regimes based on regimes and stateless structures based on Soviet traditions and simulated Soviet statehood in these areas despite that fact, it's quite evident that significant tensions, regional tensions, exist there, and potential for state-building projects there in the area have not been realized at the moment. Of course, the prevalence of localizing and tribal practices there in those countries prevents from developing state-building projects at the moment, state-building projects for specific regions in the area. For the moment, we should not ignore possibility that development of state-building processes in the 5 new independent states in the area could at some stage lead to emergence of alternative state-building projects in the area. At least potential for that type of developments exist. And final and probably most crucial point is a point related to the 4 continuing projects of state building. Those continuing projects of state building in the area led to creation of the 4 unrecognized states there: Transnistria, Karabakh, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia. It's quite obvious that nearly 2 decades of existence of those entities. In case of Karabakh, actually, it is 2 decades of existence of state-building projects. Other cases already are quickly approaching this level. So 2 decades of existence, of practical existence of case in a very hostile, unfriendly environment prove the viability and validity of efforts undertaken there. We have to very seriously consider the results of those 4 state-building projects. To maintain the approach which was typical of Soviet period, and to maintain this this approach in present situation, a purely legalistic approach, would be very dangerous. I'd like to remind you that when Transnistrian Republic has been first proclaimed in September 2nd of 1990, the immediate reaction of Mikhail Gorbachev, then President of Soviet Union, was that establishment of this Transnistrian Republic has no legal base. Of course, from a formal point of view, President of Soviet Union was completely right, because the Soviet simulated Soviet stateness gave no place for such projects to develop. But we are living not in the period of Soviet Union, and we are not officials of that country to maintain the same type of approach which Gorbachev used then. We are political scientists who have to acknowledge and recognize and analyze all aspects of the problem, but not only a legal one. So from this point of view, to insist on non-recognition of the 4 existing projects of state building would be very dangerous both politically and analytically. Saying so, I don't want to underestimate importance of international recognition. Of course, international recognition and particular recognition by legal international authorities like United Nations, for example, or CSCE or other similar structures are crucially important for development of statehood projects. But we cannot make the solution of hundreds or probably thousands of practical issues related to well-being or very existence of people in the area being completely determined by the fact of legal recognition or non-recognition of the structures that they are using in their everyday life by national or international authorities. What we can do as political scientists is to make a careful balance of all aspects of the projects of state building, be they internal or external, be they related to practical running of power relations on everyday basis, or legal recognition of the political structures that emerge there in the international arena. All these aspects have to be analyzed, calculated, and we have to evaluate them to understand what are the prospects for development of those projects. At this moment, I must say that the balance of this calculation is a very uneasy one, and differs greatly in case of each of the four state building projects that I mentioned.